Hey everybody, this is Joel. I'm down at Boom Comics in Topeka, Kansas. We've got this furious debate about some card game and which cards are the best going on. I'm not sure what's happening, but they're very engaged in it. It's an exciting day down here. All right, what I'm here to do today, to talk about today, is how to get a gig in Dryden, how to get a job in Dryden. I get a lot of emails and Facebook posts from folks who are sort of, hey, I'm an author, hey, I'm an artist, give me an assignment. And that's not really what we do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get engaged in Dryden and when I get involved in getting engaged in Dryden and what that looks like. And then I am going to talk about what stories I would like to see myself, things that I'm actually interested in. So first of all, let's just talk about Dryden being under Creative Commons. The entire universe, the full history, all the alien species, all of the art that you see is under the Creative Commons license. And what that means is that it's free for anybody else to come along and use, as long as they credit back and as long as they make their contribution to the universe also available under Creative Commons, which means you do not need my permission to write in the Dryden universe. You do not need my permission to do art in the Dryden universe. You do not need my permission to make a major motion picture in the Dryden universe. All you have to do is credit Dryden appropriately and put your materials under the same license, 3.0 license. So in terms of getting an assignment from me, you don't need it. If you see something in Dryden that you like and you want to draw it, you want to write it, you want to film it, go for it. Have a great time. Do honor the Creative Commons. Do honor the specific individual who did the work that you're building your work off of, if you can identify them. If not, identify the Dryden Experiment and the Creative Commons. I've talked about that elsewhere, so I'm not going to go on about that very long. But then I do also run a publishing company. It's extremely small. It's very, very limited what I do. I offer a no cash advance contract, so all revenue is split off of profits, and I do a print-on-demand scheme, so there's no set number of copies that are going to be produced. But having said that, I do buy things. And so the rest of this is going to be about what I'm interested in. If you wanted to approach me and talk to me about Dryden and talk to me about publishing something in Dryden, these are the kind of things that I'm interested in. And I have to put a caveat on this, and every publisher in the whole world is going to give you the exact same caveat, and I'm so sorry for you out there. If it is not well edited, if the story is not developed, if the plot is not put together, I'm not going to pick it up. And a lot of times I'm never even going to find out whether or not your story is very good, and it's about time. I have a day job, and when I look at picking up a story, one of the questions that I have to ask is, how quickly can I put this into print? You know, how much time am I going to lose doing the editing? I do the editing myself by and large, not always, but most of it. And a story that is well edited and finished and ready to go has got 1,000 times better chance with me than one that isn't, just because I don't have the time to go back and fix things. Even if I like them, I'm not going to have time to fix it. Typically, I know within a few pages of a story whether or not I'm interested in it, just because I've made an assessment of whether or not the work is going to be too big of a burden for me. So just be aware, if you haven't taken the time to proofread it, I'm not going to either. So that's absolutely boilerplate language from any publisher on the planet. So we've got it out of the way. So with that aside, I do love first authors. Send me your first book. Send me that first big publication. A lot of times I'm a good market for a first-time publisher, for a first-time author for their publication, because my print schedule is very limited and because I do a no advance contract and my advertising budget is next to nil. I am a good place for somebody who's looking for a mark on their resume. They want the credit. They want to get the shared community. We have hundreds of people on our Twitter feed. We have hundreds of people on our Facebook page. I don't know, there's a separate fan page that's run by Don Van Alstall. I don't know how many members it has. But getting published with me is street cred, and it's a good way to get your name out and get some exposure, whereas a more advanced author is more likely to try to get a cash advance and a guaranteed number of sales and so on and so forth. And those are things I just can't offer. So by all means, if you're a well-known author and you think what we're doing is great, send me a story. I'd love to have you on our crew. But I'm also a good place for somebody who's just starting out and looking for the exposure. That's kind of a good match for what I do. So I will pick it up. And here are things that are interesting to me and that I think are important. And this does sort of devolve into a rant, okay? I'm really tired of the white man's plight. There is a trend in movies and videos to have multicultural elements, but in the end, it's the white guy who's the hero. How it should have ended, guys, HISE folks, when they did their review of Guardians of the Galaxies, they went through all the characters. Here's the blue guy who's working for the red guy who's trying to kill the purple guy, and blah, blah, blah. And they got to the end and said, but remember, the white guy is the hero. Man, that's a powerful message. There's a ton of sort of, I don't know if you even want to call it racism, but just that targeted marketing that's trying to appeal to a specific demographic very often leaves out the entire rest of the planet. And I'd like to get away from that. In Star Wars, the first 3 movies, it was this family of white guys battling for control of the galaxy over the opinions of thousands of equally qualified races. Let's get over that. One of the assumptions that happens in the Dryden Experiment as you move forward in time is that racial mixing becomes extremely common. One of the contributions that John Bird made to our universe was to make the observation by the year 2503, humans are light brown. Just on average, specifically with my main character in Alder's world, he talks about in the very early part of the book that he looks mostly Japanese because a lot of his ancestors were from Japan, but his nose isn't really broad, and his bridge, I don't remember what it's called right there, is actually fairly high because of the Irish ancestry. I think that that's very much kind of the vibe that I like. I like the fact that we live in a big world full of a lot of different people with a lot of different philosophies and attitudes, and I would really like to see some science fiction that just says, I'm tired of the white guy's plight. You know, isn't it curious in Lord of the Rings that it's all of the white guys helped by the elves who are like the super white guys versus the Dark Lord? Okay, thanks. He's trying to bring an age of darkness. Okay, thanks. With his 9 dark riders. Yeah, okay. You know, I get the joke. Tell me a story about a dark guy. How would that be? Let's just get over that. So culturally, I'm interested in that challenge. One of the things that's sort of related to that is that the sort of the hard sci-fi culture, especially the Alder's world culture, or I'm sorry, the primer culture, the first era of our history culture, is very much based on a European science fiction tradition. You know, it's the descendants of Arthur C. Clarke and a lot of sort of wonderful writers, but Isaac Asimov, but all the same sort of cultural background, very sort of American or English background, and I'm really interested in stories that feel like other cultures, that feel like they came from a different tradition. I'll give you an excellent example of that. I love the book When Gravity Fails. It was set, I think, in North Africa. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but the cultural assumptions were different, the norms were different. There was a coffee ritual that you had to go to before you spoke to important people. I really love that when you get into anime and manga, you get into this sort of, that was interesting pronunciation, you get into this sort of Asian cultures, Japanese and Chinese cultures, and they feel different, and the priorities are different, and it's a little bit hard, you know, what word is different in the writing, but I'm interested in stories where the minarets play at the hours to call people to prayer. I'm interested in cultures that could be said to descend from Confucianism, and that feel and look differently. One of the real appeals to the Firefly television show was that it had a very Asian feel to the universe. We could feel that when they left Earth, that was the Chinese influence had been very strong, and it could still be felt very strongly. They cursed very badly in Chinese. I really like that, and I'm interested in stories like that. I'm absolutely open to LBGT. Somebody sent me a gay story. I'm a member of the Queer Sci-Fi Facebook group. They emailed me today and said, hey, we want to do a press release on your book. That's fabulous. Send me a story in return. I'd love to see it. Let's get out of this little narrowly defined who our hero character can be. We're not trying to appeal to the masses. We're trying to appeal to ourselves. That's why we're under Creative Commons, so we can do the things we love. Feed me something that's culturally interesting. interesting. I'm really into that. The other thing that we can do, because we're not trying to appeal to that mass dynamic, is that there have been 953 billion stories and movies where the whole world is going to come to the end, if not for the saving grace of our main character, the abilities of the main character. That's absolutely the hero's journey. It makes sense to me. I understand that story, and I don't think we're ever going to get away from the hero's journey. It's an important archetype story in the entirety of human consciousness. But what we have the ability to do, because we're not chasing that biggest demographic, is we can take stories that are interesting to us on a sort of a narrow band. We don't need to tell the huge stories. And I'm going to give an example from the Dryden Experiment, although sort of indirectly. Charlotte Garnier, who invented the cybernetic whale species that became Il Solitaire, in her other work that I've seen, she has a real love for nature, and she's really attracted to aquatic animals and birds, and she has this interesting creature that's sort of a guardian of nature. It's somewhere along the reigns of a green mother or a slender man or a sort of a supernatural living Gaia creature who's just odd and strange, and it doesn't look like anything that came out of mass produced. It looks most like Baba Yaga's hut, if you know who that is. And I love that character, and I wish there was space for it in the Dryden universe, because it's interesting and it's different. And I want to encourage people to send me things that are flavored in ways that would never appeal to mass market, but might just kick ass anyway. And that's really hard to define. Part of the reason why that's outside of the mainstream is exactly because it's hard to define. The mainstream wants things that are easy to digest, and I'm asking for the other stuff. So be aware that we have 4 eras in our history, and there's only hard science in one of them, and out in the other 4 eras, things get weirder and weirder as we go along. And I want to encourage things that feel different, whether it's a gay character who's unrepentantly gay, whether it's somebody who comes from an Arab culture and their philosophies. You know, where are all of the spaceships that took off into space with different groups based on their cultural beliefs or their religious beliefs? You know, one of the things as the New World opened up in world history was that European groups that didn't fit in very well in Europe but could get enough money together to get a ship took off, and the people who had been the oddballs and the outsiders became the pioneers and the founders. Well, those guys have been taking off into space. By the year 2503, those guys have been taking off into space for a long time. Tell me about those guys. What are they like? What do they believe? What motivates them? I think this is fascinating. All right, so that's I've made the note on here: Arabs, Africans, and Druids. Send me Arabs, Africans, and Druids, except in space. How's that? All right. So, having said all of that, now I'm going to talk a little bit about some folks or places that already exist in the Dryden Experiment that I'm personally interested in and would like to see some development in. So, if you're looking for a way to tailor your story or your art or your game to something that I'm interested in, here are some places to go. One of the characters that I'm absolutely the most interested in seeing someone develop, I really believe in this character, is the character Lakshmi Bhutta. Lakshmi Bhutta is the woman who, as a graduate student at the University of Antarctica, invented the concept, at least, that led to framing drive technology, that is the faster than light travel. And there's a little bit about her in the timeline of history, and there's also a little bit about her in the history of faster than light space travel. I'm really interested in her. She's a strong female character, which I like, and she's a genius intelligence, which is a lot of fun. And I also think that she has a kind of a very strong sociopathic tendency. She dies at a very young age in a snow skiing accident. There's something about that mix of raw genius, almost savant-like inability to get along with other humans. She finds them problematic and confusing. Mathematics makes more sense to her, and a daredevil lifestyle that I think breeds a really interesting character. And I would like to see somebody tell me a story about Lakshmi Bhutta. All right. There's an interesting point in the 2300s in our history where the corporations are really taking over and there's a push for control. And at that point, the planet Palmer is in danger of being taken over by a corporation, and instead it decides to give itself to the League of Planets, and it's how the League of Planets is formed and founded. I think that's an interesting moment in the history of our universe, and I'd like to see somebody explore it. It's on the timeline of history on the Dryden Authors and Artists page. I don't think there's very much developed on it. It's a pretty wide open spot if somebody wanted to build something. Sort of related is the planet Sufin. Sufin is a fiercely independent planet. It is definitely a democracy. It's also sort of a unique environment in that it's a fairly high G planet. And so the people who come from there, when they get onto 1G or lower planets, just seem almost sort of superhuman. They have very dense muscle mass and very dense bone mass. And they're not at all superhuman, but boy, are they fiercely strong and independent. They show up in stories as sort of guerrilla warriors and agitators on corporate planets. I'd like to see someone explore the Sufin some more, maybe in a novel, maybe in a role-playing module when Big Damn Sci-Fi comes out. But I'm interested in the Sufin and in their world. There is a story that I started and abandoned, and if somebody wanted to take the idea and run with it, they'd be welcome to. In the corporate higher-ups, the people live in extreme wealth and are really able to spend extraordinarily large amounts of money entertaining themselves. They're sort of like the folks from the Capitol in Hunger Games. When the Hunger Games designers go to build a Hunger Games arena, there doesn't seem to be any obstacle in terms of money or technology, and the corporate masters, especially in CERT corporations, certainly live a sort of extremely lavish lifestyle. And one of the things that I think that they do is they have these pleasure domes where you can go and have yourself sort of put into hibernation, a la Avatar, and then you have an avatar that is an actual organic entity that you wear around in this pleasure dome, and you're able to do absolutely vulgar things, you know, in terms of sexual adventures or actual combat sports to the death. And then when it's all over, you just unplug from the ruined avatar and go on with your daily life. All right, so that's the environment. But in this story, there has been a series of just bizarre murders by corporate executives who don't seem to have any reason to behave that way, slaughtering their entire families and doing strange things, and then professing that they have no idea how to do it. Well, the catch at the end of the story, it's a murder mystery, obviously. The catch at the end of the story is that there's a rogue AI that's gotten loose in the pleasure dome and is reverse engineering, planting a virus in humans that's causing them to commit these murders. So it's a turnabout, right? The humans are being infected with the virus by the computer. All right, that's my idea of being clever. I'm never going to write that story. If somebody else wanted it, it's wide open. Our main character, or our namesake character at least, is Sally Dryden, who brings about the end of the primer in this story, Bride of Europa, which happens somewhere around 2550 or 2600. We're not sure when that is. She's actually 200 years old at that time. She met the European as a young woman, and he genetically altered her. I've written a sort of a guidelines to writing stories about Sally Dryden, and I'll get that up here on the Facebook page. It needs some editing before I do it. What I would love to see is somebody publish a short story collection that was all stories about Sally Dryden, written all by Dryden authors. I think that would kick ass. As a matter of fact, if I had a couple Sally Dryden stories, that's something I might take over the development of. So I'll get more material online, but watch on the Facebook Authors and Artists page for information about how to write about Sally Dryden, because I'd love to see some folks write about her. Then one of the things that I haven't seen anybody develop yet that I'm really interested in is In the Dark, when the Technoprey human Cetacean hybrid comes out, or European hybrid comes out, and starts just murdering humans and destroying human space. I would love to see somebody put together a short story collection that was sort of last man standing stories, stories about civilization is coming to an end. It's the apocalypse. Who's the last one left? What are their last hours like? I'd like to see just a grim, depressing, bloody set of stories put together as the darkest, gloomiest days in human history. That would entertain me. I would love that. All right. We have a ton of room out there in Codex 2 that hasn't been explored for entire solar empires, and I want to encourage people who have solar empire stories or galactic empire stories to look at Codex 2. The sort of rule of thumb for Codex 2 is we don't really want anybody to capitalize on Earth and talk about Earth as the origin or the source of their their government, on the idea that there's 10 billion stars in the galaxy, and if you had 1 billion of them in your empire, you'd have plenty, and we could still have 10 other empires out there in Codex 2, and then maybe write exciting crossover stories where those guys start to meet and fight. So if you have a big history with a big science fantasy future, I want you to encourage you to send it to me with the idea that it might become a part of the Codex 2 universe. I'd love to look at more than one empire out there. So let's do that. The other thing, and this is not one so much for you authors, it's maybe more for the artists, though I'd love to see an author take it on too. The Age of Beauty, which is the second era, comes about as humans are sort of pushed back out of space, back to their planets. And they're still out there, but they don't travel in space very much anymore. And instead, the Il Solitaire, which are the human whale, cybernetic organisms, and the organic space creatures built by the European, have taken over space. And I think this is a gorgeous era for somebody to do some fabulous art in. And the image that is in my head is of flying jellyfish, giant space jellyfish, or huge organic spaceships that rise up over the horizon, and their tendrils are reaching down and feeling along the surface in front of them. And lots of room for things that are translucent and airy like the clouds, and deep thinking, deep space creatures with interesting geometries. It's just, I think it's a really beautiful era, and I'd love to see somebody. You could absolutely write stories about the child who's made friends with the space jellyfish. I don't know. Anyway, I think it's a gorgeous era, and I'd love to see somebody write in it. So that's basically all I had to say in terms of things that I was interested in, except to say that part of the very name of Dryden is the Dryden Experiment. And bring me things that I've never thought of. Bring me things that never in a million years would I ever have come up with it. I think about music. You know, Gavin Revitt is a very talented musician, and I'd love to find some way to incorporate his music into what we do. I'm absolutely interested in games. I'm interested in that hybrid that is the future of storytelling. You know, we've gone past books, and we've gone past movies, we've gone past video games, and you have the bright idea for the fusion that is the future. I'd love to help you develop it. I'm totally into whatever comes next. All right, well, that's 23 minutes of everything that's in my head today. So by all means, send me a submission. The only way to guarantee that I'm not interested in it is if I've never seen it. So I'm Joel. This is Boom Comics in Topeka, Kansas. Have yourself a great day. Thanks for joining us.